Candice. Welcome back to our reconciliation series. How are you doing?
Hi, Michelle. I am good. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you, and very excited to get stuck into inventory reconciliations today. I think we had a look at our why we're doing the recon. What's the purpose behind it, and again, regardless of the nature of the reconciliation you're doing, regardless of the section, ultimately the end goal is the same for all of them. And one of the things that we spoke about was looking into the differences, and I think that becomes very, very relevant when it comes to something like a finished case goods reconciliation.
Agreed. And, inventory, I did say in the last call, I had a 2 to 3 month audit on AR, and that is not what we have to do, but inventory recon is definitely can be the most complex recon for any of us at Protea.
Yeah, and on any given day, we're looking at clients with, they could have a few thousand cases on hand, using different locations, different sales channels, and methods of distribution.
Different units of measure, bottles,
different
cases,
exactly.
bundles.
Sometimes all lumped into one. I think it is challenging for a variety of reasons, but the key, again, is to step back and remember what we're trying to achieve. And I think a lot of the times on complex topics, we do get sort of held down by the detail and the complexity, and allow that to sometimes overwhelm us. And we sometimes forget what the basic premise, in this case, of the reconciliation, and what that is. And ultimately it comes back to the same thing. You've got X amount of units on hand per QuickBooks, per your records. You have X amount per your warehouse reports. Okay, let's reconcile.
Exactly. What everybody needs to realize is that when you're doing an inventory recon, you want to identify what are the reconciling items.
Yeah.
And in 99% of these situations where we have a reconciling item difference, it is not your fault and it is not Protea's fault. But how do we fix that? And if we are not fixing it immediately or alerting the client immediately, it can easily snowball, and then it does become our problem because we haven't communicated it, and the timeline has become almost irrelevant because the issue is just too big now. Whereas if we had just stepped back and said to the client, you have a difference in your tasting room and you need to please take the time to fix this or discuss it with your tasting room staff, or something is happening at Course Cup and we have this big difference. Let's not just assume this is going to work. It's going to fix itself. Let's say, here are the differences. We recommend you ask the warehouse to do a count. And at that date, we will have a look at what those differences are. It is not our job to make the differences go away. It is our job to investigate the differences and report the differences.
Yes. I think a good thing to remember is it's certainly not, and again, just talking back to what we said in part one, it's not, the aim is not, it's great to get a difference of zero, reconcile difference of zero, but it's what's happening in between. Yeah, good for us. I mean, I get quite pleased with myself if I can take one balance and identify differences and get to the final amount and it's zero, and that's wonderful. But it doesn't solve what's creating these differences. And as you say, that's got nothing to do with your ability to reconcile. We are simply identifying the differences and troubleshooting and figuring out how to get to that point where we are satisfied that all of these differences can or will be resolved either through timing differences or action on somebody's part. I think that's important to remember, that it can very easily be split into two things. Timing differences that we know and can generally prove immediately, even at the time of doing the recon. A lot of things happen, first or the second month, maybe a transfer goes through. We can pick it up. We've got the proof. It's resolved. By the time we've completed the recon, it's resolved already. Or the second element being those action items, where it requires us alerting the client, us alerting the account manager. We need to tell somebody. Somebody needs to have it on their radar. Otherwise, the reconciliation is effectively rendered useless, because we've got a pretty document where we're showing these are all the differences. Good job to me. I can show that I reconciled it to zero, and nobody is looking at it. And I think, just on that, a lot of us prepare reconciliations for internal consumption. What I mean by that is it is ultimately limited to, there is a recipient, and it's usually the account manager, sometimes the senior, and then the account manager. And that is our internal, the account manager gets it, they review it, but there is a recipient. And when we prepare a reconciliation, and this talks to quality in any, when we're trying to produce a quality document, we need to remember that we are transmitting information to the intended recipient, and we have to present it in a manner that they would be able to understand and digest without having all the nitty-gritty background info that we have. And I think that's part of what can sometimes be a hindrance in our reconciliation process. We can oftentimes data dump and just put way too much in there, and then it becomes convoluted and very difficult to read. And I don't know about you, but I really, really struggle to pick out differences in a reconciliation if there's so many things going on, especially if something simple as I get the document, I open it, and there's filters on it already. Then I'm already confused, because I'm thinking, are the filters on? Is this what I'm meant to be looking at? Should I be, I don't know how you feel about that, Candice, but that is also, that can really be a stumbling block in the recon process.
No, it does. And I can tell you now, I have trouble looking at inventory recons and seeing what is in my warehouse and what is in QuickBooks, because sometimes I have to be adding, because that isn't actually shown. It doesn't actually show me what is my total for QuickBooks, what is my total for the warehouse. And then on top of that, we have reconciling differences sometimes in columns or in rows, and there are minuses and there are pluses. And I don't know which ways the minuses and pluses are going. And it actually, that alone, that part of the formatting alone confuses me. Add in filters, I end up having to do a small little recon myself to make sure that I am following, my train of thought is correct in getting back to what are we trying to do here and what is the actual difference.
Yeah. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think a few columns down, you're kind of doing the mental gymnastics, saying, right, okay, what was the original difference? Okay, going back to those initial columns, warehouse was X, QBO is different. What impact does this have? It can, and the concern there, or the risk there, is the key issues can get lost in how it is presented. And something else to consider, and I think, even if we don't I mentioned that most of our reconciliations and what we produce are for internal consumption, but there are instances where the client is also looking at that. Now we have to take it a step further in terms of, again, how do we present this information in a manner that makes sense and it retains its integrity? So everything that's important is still in there, but the client, who we have to assume does not have the same level of accounting expertise that we have, reconciliation expertise, how are we getting the point across to them? And I think that when we approach our reconciliations, in particular the inventory recon, we need to be viewing it as, I need to put this document together as if the client was the end user. Can they look at this and see, this is what I have in the warehouse, these are the issues that need to be resolved, right? Because that's what a client likes to, oftentimes when we ask them something, they don't want the long backstory. Just tell them what needs to be resolved. Do I need to ask the warehouse to count again? just tell me what I need to do. Take out we don't want you to spin your wheels trying to figure out what to do. It needs to be clearly spelled out in the recon. This is what requires action.
Exactly. You can do, like you said, the most beautiful inventory recon. And another issue with this recon is that you get to a net difference of 20 cases. Great.
Yes.
But you
Yes.
have 80 cases for some SKUs that are missing, and you have 100 cases more for the other SKUs. So that net difference is meaningless when you end up with differences that are going different ways. And if we had to send an inventory recon to a client and show that, and their most expensive SKU is the one that's missing,
right?
How do we explain that? Agreed. I think it's a fantastic idea to get this into a format where the client is able to see it, and it takes the load off of us because it shows timing differences, shows action items, and it is very clear which action items are for Protea and which action items are for the client. And it takes the accountability, not all of it, but it takes the accountability off of Protea.
Yes. And that is ultimately, we are the purpose, and say it again, yes, to identify the differences, but it's what comes after that. Because a recon that is brilliant and reconcile to zero done in January 2024, and it is now December 2024, and nobody's looked at it, or we haven't flagged any issues, that becomes a huge problem. It really doesn't matter that your recon has balanced every month, because ultimately there are or have been action items that have just been ignored. So, I'd encourage everyone, when approaching your recons and inventory recons in particular, are we looking, and that's what we're going to look at in the next part of our inventory recon series, but are we, number one, validating those differences, and number two, is somebody checking in on them? Are we following up? Or are we getting to a case where it's a few months down the line and somebody has to ask, hey, whatever happened to that pending transfer that went out the one warehouse, never received into the other one? What's happening with that? And as you say, the timeline becomes irrelevant once so much time has gone by. It becomes a big problem, because good luck to anyone who thinks if you just throw it out to your client, say, whatever happened to those 600 cases back about 11 months ago that you said you would check on?
Like, I don't know, that person doesn't work here anymore. Then what?
Well, very, very, very valid. So, lots to think about, and we will go a little bit further in our last part of the series, but, just key takeaways. Make sure, first and foremost, before the question, if we're looking at the recon, we're satisfied we've got it down to zero. That's one part done. That's a tick in your favor. Make sure that the second part, that needs to get relayed to someone, to the client. Somebody needs to action it. But before they can do it, they need to understand what they're looking at. So there's our job as well. Are we presenting it in a way that is easily understandable and allows the person to just go straight out the gate and let's seek a resolution? Who do I need to track down? Which warehouse is the problem? Right, let me get this sorted. So that needs to be a challenge for all of us when we are preparing our recons, bearing those key points in mind.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Candice, thank you so very much, and I look forward to the next part.
Thanks, Michelle.